This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own move. Carrington. North are in front.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Deflating Loss Pod, also known as North Pod. It's another loss for us. It's been a long week. I've been unwell all week, and all I could think about all week is it's going to be fantastic to watch us lose on the weekend. And North Melbourne did not disappoint if you were coming at it from that perspective. We'll talk all about our loss to the Crows shortly, get into story of the game. We'll get into North Podium, positives, negatives, all the stuff that we normally run through. Back to a regular podcast format. I know last week I needed a little bit of a break. We did something a little bit different, but we're back to regular programming this week. Unfortunately, our one-game winning streak in Hobart has come to an end. 7 losses in a row to start the season, and we've added one here in Hobart. Our last game there was that round 24 win against Gold Coast at the end of last year. So unfortunately, yeah, we're back to a losing streak on that ground after a dominant one-game performance last year. I am using a bit of sarcasm here just to help me survive, and I hope that everyone understands. It's just my way of coping at the moment. I had a look at our percentage after this game, and we're sitting at 57.3, which is, it's poor, go figure, but it's heading back into those 2021 and 2022 type vibes that we had, which is not a good space to be in. Our percentage at the end of last year was 71.5. Also not a good percentage for what it's worth, but I guess I'm just trying to provide some context there that right now we're sitting in a place where we've gone backwards. We know last year we lost most games, but we were in lots of them. We kind of lost several close ones, and we probably should have won one or two more last year. We were certainly in games for longer last year, and we've certainly taken a step backwards this year. In the first 7 rounds, it's a long year. We're only about a third of the way through, so there's time for us to peg some of that back, and hopefully we do with some wins, but yeah, I pondered after this game. I thought, I wonder what we're looking like percentage-wise, and spoiler alert, it's not good. Not that it's going to matter at the moment, because West Coast's gone at least 2 games clear, and the Hawks are a game clear, so we've got to work on winning one first. Anyway, let's go to team selection. Not a lot to talk about here. It was out Tyler Sellers and out Eddie Ford. Ford with a bit of an injury, and Sellers omitted. In came Wardlaw and Hardiman for his debut, and the sub named was Zach Fisher. So it was great to have Hardiman in for a debut. I guess the team selection look was interesting because we had 2 forwards coming out, and we had a midfielder and a defender coming in. So we were expecting a bit of a shuffle, and we did see that, which I'll talk about in a minute. Not necessarily the kind of shuffle that I think we were anticipating, but Wardlaw came back in after that week's rest. Hardiman came in off the back of some fine VFL form. I did have someone ask me a week or two ago whether we could expect Riley's debut, and I said, look, I haven't seen much from him at VFL level that suggested to me that he was knocking down the door. But that being said, the door is pretty wide open at the moment for this North Melbourne side, so I wasn't stunned, but I guess I wasn't anticipating his debut so early. But it's fantastic to get another one in, another one from our draft class from last year, just to get a look at him. Sellers is probably a little unfortunate, but look, if you're not going to touch it in your first 2 games, essentially, it is hard to justify continuing to give him a game. It's a really hard forward line to play in at the moment, is the only thing I would say about that. So I do feel for him a little bit. I'm sure he'll probably get a chance at some stage later in the year. He did go back and kick 3 goals in the VFL, so hopefully he continues doing that, and we might see him later on in the year. I didn't mind Fisher as a sub. He's a flexible player. I know he's been playing defence for us, and that's what he did come in and do in this game. But, if a particular sort of player was injured or, there was some kind of other reason to move the magnets around We know he can play forward. He can certainly play through the middle as well if we needed him to. So he's a flexible sub. I don't expect to see him listed there very often, but once or twice in the year, I'm here for it. What it did mean is that Lazaro was able to play a full game, but as I'll talk about a little bit later on, whilst I'm pleased for him to get a full game, he played in pretty much entirely in a forward line role. Didn't attend a centre bounce at all. And he was part of that reshuffle, really, because with Sellers and Ford coming out, it was really Lazaro and Powell that filled those forward line roles, which, I don't know how I feel about. I really think that, sure, they can rotate through there, but I'd love to see them also playing through the midfield. So anyway, that's what team selection looked like. I'm sure there's a reason for that madness. I'm sure Clarko has something in mind, but it's just, for me, it's not a great look to have Lazaro and Powell playing that role because as we know, they're primarily mids, and that's where their best footy is. So if we're not able to find a spot for them in the midfield, I'm not sure that stuffing them in a forward pocket is the right role for them. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. The match result was us losing by 57 points, 81 to 138. It was really never in doubt, unfortunately. Story of the game, it was just ball movement dominance by the Crows. From go to woe, they were able to transition the ball way, way better than us. We found it really hard to move the ball past the wing, which I think is something I've said probably 6 or 7 times already so far this year. Their kicking looked elite, and I wouldn't say that the Crows are a top 3 or 4 kicking side in the competition. They're a good kicking side. We made them look like they were the best in the competition. They were just able to hit target after target. They had a really strong marking game, and in comparison, we were unable to move it with any kind of composure. We weren't able to hit short targets. We had 1 or 2 where we were able to transition up the field the whole way without a stoppage or a turnover. But by and large, we were able to get 1 or 2 kicks sideways, and then we were kicking along to a contest and hoping, whereas the Crows, as I said, just cut us up. In terms of the statistics to go with that, 41 inside 50s to 60, 83 marks to 117, 6 marks inside 50 to 24, 7 contested marks to 23. All of those the Crows' way, if that wasn't abundantly clear. And it just appeared that they had way more time and space due to the accuracy of their kicking, and I guess juxtaposed with our really poor kicking. And I think probably the most damning thing for me, and the thing that was most upsetting or most glaring, was defensively we were just completely incapable of spoiling or outpositioning the opposition. It honestly looked like a training drill at times for the Crows. I guess, as someone sitting on the couch watching, it's really easy to say something. So I do appreciate that from the couch, some things look easier. But I would love $1 for the amount of times that the Crows kicked it out in front to a teammate. They marked on the lead with a North Melbourne player either trailing way behind or trailing and sort of putting on half a spoiling attempt, but not enough of an attempt to actually impact the ball. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I can recall us putting on a spoil in a situation where the Crows have not quite nailed the kick, and that's allowed us some time and space to spoil. Just defensively as a team, it's not just the 6 or 7 defenders. The whole ground defence, when the opposition has the ball and it's a stopped ball situation, so it's a free kick or it's a mark, I don't understand what the game plan is anymore, because it's relatively man-to-man now. It's not this huge zone situation where they're constantly getting out the back. It's more a case of they will lead, and we're either not reactive enough, not quick enough, not athletic enough to allow them, to put enough pressure on that kick to create turnovers often enough. And if you watch us with the ball, it's just, we're experts at it. So that was definitely the big difference for me. You could list several other things that meant that the game didn't go our way, but for me, their capacity to transition the ball versus ours was the most glaring thing that resulted in us losing it by 9.5, 10 goals. And yeah, it was just a consistent story all game. I think if this was a video podcast, I'd be clip after clip of the Crows just hitting short kicks and then, backing that up with us missing a short kick, because whilst there weren't massive glaring turnovers galore in the game for us, it was just time after time of us hitting that third or fourth kick coming out of the defence to a contest, and that contest resulting in either a throw-in or a turnover. So yeah, that's what the story of the game looked like. Unfortunately, just dominated again, and I think the thing that probably hurts the most for some North Melbourne fans is, the Crows were in a similar position to us a couple of years ago. I remember a game in lockdown where we smashed them by 10 goals, and it was, probably the last time that we had a really big win. And just thinking, all right, well, at least there's another team, at the real bottom of the barrel with us. And to see them now, pushing for finals or at least competing is, a far cry from where we're at. So on one hand, it probably provides a bit of hope. But on the other hand, you go, how is it that they've moved so far in the time that we've probably gone backwards, or at the very, if looking at it with the most admiring lens, we've gone sideways? I don't have an answer to that, but if anyone does, let me know. I'd love to unpack that. 5 stars on the North podium this week. A couple of different names, which is nice. LDU got the 4 votes. I thought offensively he was our best player. It was one of his better games for the year. I still think he could do a little bit more defensively. I don't think he's the complete player, but as I talked about, I can't remember whether it was last week or the week before, I think part of the problem there is that we're expecting so much of him because of the lack of other players around him that can lighten the load. So offensively, had a great game, 29 disposals, 4 tackles, 6 clearances, 3 marks, 6 inside 50s, 5 intercepts, 13 contested possessions, a team high 28 pressure acts. And I know it has clipped his defensive work. I think part of it is that some of those pressure acts were just that. They were acts and they weren't strong enough pressure applied to the opposition to really impact the ball. But yeah, he did burst away from stoppage a bit more than he has in previous weeks. I know that there was some criticism for him in the commentary for not kicking enough, but I think he probably kicked it at the right times and handballed at the right times. We know that he's not a particularly accurate kick all the time at the moment. He's a penetrating kick for sure. He's got a long kick on him, but if he's kicking it inside 50 to a target, I don't know that I feel super confident about that at the moment. But if he's going to bomb it 55 metres long, sure, I'm happy with that. As I said, I think it was probably his best game for the year considering the circumstances. I know he played well round 1 or 2, I think it was. But yeah, I thought it was a solid game for LDU. 3 votes, Colby McKercher. So first time into the votes for him. I thought it was arguably his best game that he's played. Only 7 games, so not a lot of competition with himself there. But 32 disposals, 7 marks, 5 intercepts. Went at 78% disposal effectiveness. 573 metres game, which was a team high. And just, was a real general in defence. He and Sheezel were the 2 driving out of there like they have been most weeks. But I think that this week McKercher sort of probably took a step up in terms of his responsibility, as Sheezel was being asked to do a couple of different roles, particularly in the second half. McKercher probably bit off 1 or 2 that, in hindsight, that he wish he had back. But at the same time, he's being asked to do so much back there as a 7 gamer. So I'm totally happy to forgive him. If he's not doing that, 6 or 7 times a game, totally fine. He's allowed 1 or 2 that, probably were poor decisions, because generally speaking, he's trying to take the game on. Even if it's a short pass, generally it's a short pass sort of towards the corridor, or a short pass that might open up something else. So sure, he's not winning the hard ball. 32 disposals, a lot of those would be uncontested. I didn't check that, but he's being asked to do a lot, and I thought he did a fantastic job under duress today, particularly given the circumstances of the game and how fast we were out of the game and how much time the ball spent in our defensive 50 or defensive 80. I mean, there were times in that first half where the ball lived there for 10 or 15 minutes at a time. So, yeah, a really encouraging display by McKercher. First votes for him from me this year, so it's good to see he was able to contribute in that way. Harry Sheezel had a quiet game with 29 disposals, 12 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances and 24 pressure acts. I'm sort of saying that half tongue-in-cheek. It wasn't his best game, but he still managed to pick up the 2 votes for me, and I thought really it was more a case of him being asked to do lots of different things. As I said, in the second half, he was pushed into the middle a bit and even played sort of off half forward a couple of times. Seemed to be sort of swapping with Paul Curtis after the centre clearance. He also did have 5 centre bounce or 6 centre bounce attendances, so went in there a little bit in the middle. It was interesting listening to Clarko after the game talk about, their priorities with Sheezel, and I absolutely get it. He was asked about when we can expect to see Sheezel pushed more into the middle, and he said, well, he's playing so well in defence and we don't have that many players that are set, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to move him from that role at the moment. So I think I'm comfortable with that, where, the game sort of drifts away and we do experiment with him after that point. Yeah, played the role that he's been playing all year in that first half and tried his best. Took a good contested intercept mark. Would love him probably to bite off a bit more in terms of, rather than just being happy to bomb it long down the wing, try and trust his boot a bit more and do a bit more of what McKercher was able to do this game, bite off some shorter kicks that might open up the rest of the field. Again, I'm nitpicking a player who's absolutely trying his best as a second-year player in a side that's battling. So I thought Sheezel was solid today and earns the 2 votes, and obviously is going to go further ahead onto the North podium on the back of that. And 1 vote, look, Duursma and Zerha were the 2 that I tossed up. Zerha is probably unlucky. He kicked 3 goals, 3, and can count himself a little unlucky. It was one of his better games in terms of impact, at least. But I have given the 1 vote to Zane Duursma. 9 disposals, 4 marks, 2 goals, 1, and 2 goal assists. I think in the middle part of the game, the second quarter and the third quarter, he was pretty quiet. But I thought his first quarter and his last quarter, based on the opportunities that he got, I thought he was really opportunistic. I thought he showed that kind of that class and cleanliness that we know that we're expecting from a draft pick as high as him. Took 1 or 2 marks where he came up and played that higher half forward role that we know that he can play. Would have loved to see him do that a bit more in this game, but on the TV it's hard to know, to what extent he's playing deeper or if he's just not leading to the right spots. That's probably hard to talk about because of watching on TV, but when the ball did get down to the forward line, he was super dangerous. As I said, 2 goal assists to go with his 2 goals, and in a game where the ball spent very little time in our half of the ground, I thought, he and Zerha, Larkey and Curtis did their best to create some contests and some, opportunities. Were absolutely outplayed still, so I'm not going to sit here and say that our forward line played well, but I think they competed at least, and Duursma and Zerha were a big part of that. So yeah, I've given Duursma the one vote for his 2 goal assist, 4 mark performance. Best opposition player, look, toss it up between Rory Laird and Isaac Rankine. Laird had 34 touches and 13 clearances, 2 goal assists, 6 tackles, 1 goal. He was fantastic through the middle, really dominated us at times. I know that he's got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of an uncontested off-half-back bull. I think he's much more than that, and today he showed that with the 13 clearances. And yeah, Rankine killed us. We know that the small forwards kill us. The commentators made the comment that he's kicked the most goals for his career against North Melbourne, which does not surprise me. I'd say his career kind of lines up with our worst years defensively, and we know that a big part of that's been leaking goals to small forwards. This year we've switched it up and we're leaking goals to tall forwards, but smalls have always been an issue. He kicked 4 goals, 1 from 17 disposals, 5 marks, 2 tackles, also had 6 clearances and a goal assist, and probably was more in and out of the game where Laird was a constant. Rankine had a really good start. I think he kicked 2 in the first quarter and then probably drifted in and out from that point, but you can't argue with 4 goals, 1, 6 clearances and a goal assist. So look, take your pick. The mids usually get all the credit, so let's say that Laird would probably be their best on, but I think Rankine, arguably had the most impact. Taylor Walker also had a great game, but probably, I think the commentators were Learising a little. I don't think that he played quite as well as the commentators were making it out, but I also appreciate that the commentators didn't have a lot to talk about given the way that the game went. So respect that from them. In terms of where the podium stands as of right now, Sheezel extends his lead. He's out to 18. Tristan Sherry 12. Tom Powell 10. Rounds out the top 3. LDU's moved himself into 4th place. He's on 9. And Paul Curtis is on 6th. That's the top 5. Sheezel, Sherry, Powell, LDU, and Curtis. All right, before we jump into the positives and negatives, just a reminder to share the podcast out with any North Melbourne fans that you know. Help me get the word out there. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave me a review if you can, and get involved with my socials. I'm at NorthPod Show in most places, or at NorthPod, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X or Twitter, all of those places. If you'd like to support the show and support me on Buy Me a Coffee, then you can find the link for that in the show notes. I appreciate all the support that I get on any platform. Really appreciate the NorthPod community. I think we're generally a really positive and optimistic bunch, but also realistic, and I love interacting with like-minded fans, so don't hesitate to get in touch. Lots of people have in recent weeks. It's fantastic to talk North Melbourne, even if we are talking about some pretty dour performances. Speaking of dour, let's go on to the negatives. And I think, like most weeks this year, it's been tricky to narrow just down to 3, but that's what I've attempted to do. Obviously, I spoke about in the story of the game the ball movement issues and how stagnant we are in comparison to our opposition. Another thing that I touched on, which I'm going to link into this first negative, is just our inability to put physical pressure on the opposition across the whole ground. So I kind of touched on LDU not being able to lay proper tackles enough, but it's not just him, it's a whole team thing. Tackles being broken or not even laid in the first place. What should be contests are ending up being uncontested marks. And today, to me, it just looked like a side severely down on confidence and kind of without that edge. I know Essendon's been talking about having the Essendon edge recently. We certainly don't have any kind of edge at the moment. It's just that really hard to quantify extra 5% of physicality and backing ourselves, to be honest, that we just do not have at the moment. We lost the tackle count 57-45 in a game where, generally speaking, we really struggled to get our hands on the ball. Tackles inside 50 were 4-19, and I'm fairly certain we had 0 to half time. So there's just, in general, a real lack of capacity for us to be fit enough and agile enough and strong enough to keep up with the opposition and corral them in such a way that we can tackle them. And every week I feel like we see examples where the opposition that will have a player that does that role that we lack to a T. I saw Ben Keys do that today. He laid a couple of really important tackles that kept the ball inside the Adelaide forward 50 and created opportunities or repeat opportunities for the Adelaide forwards. And we don't have that. I've talked about this before, but I think part of the problem is we've got some really talented offensive players in our forward line, but we seem to lack a grunt player. I think Drury is the closest to that, but he's still a smaller player. He's a bit quick. He absolutely gives his all, but I'm not sure that that's the perfect role for him in terms of being an out-and-out pressure player. It's just not perfectly his skill set. To be clear, there's so many problems with our offensive ability and ability to move the ball, but if we can't slow the opposition down, there's actually no hope. Like, we may as well give up at that point, because that's the only way that our players and our team is going to be able to split these 50-50s, to create contests, to slow the game down, to give our forwards a proper chance and our defenders a proper chance, is by slowing the opposition down, putting physical pressure on them, forcing them into quick kicks. And it's not a stat that is kept or easily accessed, but I could guarantee you that from today's game, North Melbourne had way more quick kicks around the corner without looking, or bombs out of a stoppage, than the Crows did. And most of that is created by defence, or enabled by a lack of defence, I suppose. So, yeah, it's just an ongoing problem in that I think it's really easy to say that it's an effort thing. I think there's parts of it that are effort. We know that George Wardlaw is manic with his attack on the ball. And there's a couple of players on our team that share that. Tristan Sherry would be another. So there's a want. There's certainly a technique to it. Tackling is not 100% effort, no matter what some people say or some people think. There is a technique to tackling, and certainly there's a technique to tackling effectively. And there's also a setup part to it, where I think that we are, as a group, are so young and we do not have the experience around the ground to set up effectively at stoppages or in transition situations to get ourselves in a situation that wouldn't enable us to tackle. A good example of our lack of physicality, there was a ball that Rochelle had on the far side of the ground from the broadcast, maybe 70 metres out. Bailey Scott chased him, corralled him, and in what can only be described as one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen, Rochelle handballed it through Bailey Scott's legs, went around him and collected the ball and then disposed of it. I can't remember if he kicked it or handballed it, but was able to dispose of it. Now, Bailey Scott, I understand if you're not able to lay the tackle in that scenario, but how he doesn't shepherd Rochelle out of being able to get back onto that ball, like, this is not soccer. You're able to actually put a body on. You're right near the ball. He could have put a really strong body on there. Doesn't have to lay a tackle, like I said, but that lack of capacity to use our bodies effectively to shield, to shepherd, to tackle is a big problem. And part of it is our young bodies, but I mean, Bailey Scott doesn't fit into that category. He's a more experienced player now and should be better than that. I'd be showing him that footage this week and just asking him kind of what he could have done better, because we've got to come at it from a teaching perspective. If it's the coaching staff, there's no point in shaming. It doesn't work. You've got to go, all right, here's what happened. What do you think? How do you think we could improve, or what would you do differently next time? Because efforts like that is why we are where we are. Like, just not smart footy. Next negative, I've called this one midfield madness. And it's just a smattering of thoughts about my problems with the midfield from this game. Look, firstly, same old story in general. Sherry was pretty good. Probably not one of his better games, but I thought he drew about level with Riley O'Brien around the ground. We ended up losing the clearances. In the third quarter, they really got away from us, but the hit-out battle was pretty even, and I thought it was pretty level. In general, though, you've heard all my talk about, quality of clearance. I'm not going to repeat it. It's the same as it's been all year. Like I alluded to earlier, Lazaro didn't have a centre bounce attendance. Tommy Powell had 5, and Will Phil had 13, and then was subbed out halfway through the third quarter. So for those 3 players to have 18 between them, and then to have LDU have 29, Wardlaw have 28, and Simkin have 19, I think is a problem, particularly with the Lazaro and the Powell. Like, Phillips was either on the ground or he was either in the middle or he was on the bench. And as I said, got subbed out, and I'll talk about him in a minute. But I think the fact that we had to play Lazaro and Powell almost exclusively as forwards is a problem for me, particularly when Powell's been in such good midfield form. I suppose we're trying to get Phillips a bit of look in there, and we've been pushing Simkin in there a bit more than we were at the start of the year, which I do support. But Tommy Powell can't be having only 5 centre bounce attendances. And I think, I've heard some people in the North Melbourne supporter community wanting that midfield spread to be a little bit more even. And I couldn't agree more. I think aside from LDU, who we know is our most experienced and best midfielder, I think it should be a pretty level playing field amongst, 5 or 6 others. And we're just not seeing that for whatever reason. I'm not sure what Clarko's reasoning is. I'm sure he has some. But like I said, I'm not too sure. Will Phil, we know I'm a Will Phil fan. I really want him to go well. His first half was pretty quiet. I think he had about 5 touches, so not a lot to show for. The start of his third quarter was atrocious, unfortunately. A couple of really bad errors. He had one clearance that was a handball over his head, or a high handball straight to a Crows player. And then a couple of minutes later, marked it inboard, took in a good position, maybe 40 metres out from the opposition goal. Tried to hand pass to someone on the way past, but fumbled literally a 1.5 metre handball. Recovered it, picked up the ball, and then kicked it to a 2-on-1 where Jury was, out positioned in an aerial contest. He was dragged shortly after that. I don't know if the plan was to sub him anyway, but I really want to support Phillips. I really want him to become a player, but that was really bad, unfortunately. It was a really poor sequence for him. So second game back, not a great way for him to cement his spot in the side, and more likely a great way to see him leave the side potentially. Just not a lot of positive things to say about our midfield performance from this game. I did think that Paul Curtis going in there for 9 centre bounces in the second half and then sort of swapping and drifting forward, I didn't mind that as a strategy and as something different. I'm absolutely for us trying different looks. So Curtis was able to get in there and get a couple of clearances and then go back to his favoured forward line position. We know he's a physical, strong player, so I think that's a good way to get him some touches, particularly because I'm fairly certain he had 0 touches of the footy in the first half. But we've got to do something to get this midfield mix right. It's just not working at the moment. I also think it's time for us to have a conversation about what's going on with Jai Simpkin, because he just does not look right. He doesn't look like himself. I'm certainly for him getting moved into the middle more. I talked about that last week or the week before. I think we should persist with that, but not forever. I think there will come a time when we have to figure out where we can play him and if we can play him in this side, because he is out of form, not himself. I'm not too sure what's going on with Jai. He's trying his best. He got caught holding the ball once or twice today and just did not have the impact that we know that he's had sort of 2 or 3 years ago in his best and fairest years. And much like every other senior player in this side, was not in our best 5 or 10 players today, and probably hasn't been in our best 5 or 10 all year, to be honest, which, is a concern. The final negative, it's not something that we can fix, unfortunately, but we just seriously lack defenders who are capable of doing the really intercepting, damaging roles that, opposition sides are doing to us. So today it was Ball Ace and Michelini. Hinge also played a fairly significant role. They essentially just did as they pleased across the back line, probably picked up 15 to 20 intercepts between them, many of those marks. And we just don't have players that can do that. We know the sorts of players that other sides have. Like, I'm thinking Stephen May and Lever at Melbourne, or Tommy Stewart at Geelong. Like, every club has 1 or 2 or 3 that are really good at sort of being that general off half-back, intercepting where possible, but still able to play on a man and beat that man. Sicily's another one at Hawthorn. We don't have a player like that at the moment. Now, it's possible that Chom could be there in a couple of years. He's developing. He's played, 15, if that, games of footy, and about 4 of them in defence. Griffin Logue might be able to do that when he comes back in, but I think it's asking a lot of someone coming off an ACL to come back into that role and, play really good footy. I think the expectation for Griff when he comes back will just be to get some footy, get confidence in his knee, and hopefully attack next year with some positivity. That's honestly what what I'm expecting of him. So I don't know that we can expect him to come back in and have a massive, massive impact. Callan Dawson, who, had a pretty positive start to the year, is that more dour type defender. I don't think he's going to be a massive interceptor. Look, he might develop into that. Absolutely, it's possible. I'm not sure that he reads the flight of the ball well enough to do so, whereas Charlie Comben is pretty good at that. And look, Core doesn't do it, McDonald doesn't do it. Biggie's so raw, it's not funny. He's so far off being, AFL standard from a defensive perspective at the moment. So that's why we're conceding these really large scores. Like, the ball's coming in and we're not able to intercept, mark, reset, and then go fast or go at our pace. And I think it's just one of those things that after watching for 6 or 7 weeks now and having, opposition sides do that to us, it's a real glaring issue. We know we've got heaps of options in the back line, particularly if we're fit with, Bergman and Goda, obviously, and Griffin Logue out. We know it's an area where we have depth in terms of the number of players available. But I just think I've sort of came round to that realisation, but that in terms of star power, we don't have anyone that's a marking player in our back line that is close to a star yet. And I know, look, Chom may get there, but I think we're going to have to be super patient with him because he has so much to learn about the craft of being a defender. He's a great athlete. He's got some good instincts, but he's got a long way to go. And that's not on him. That's just being realistic about where he's at, where we're at, and what to expect. So there's the main negatives. A couple of other stray thoughts. There's a long list of players with next to zero impact at halftime. Paul Curtis, Dylan Stephens, Will Field, Bailey Scott, George Wardlaw, Tommy Powell, that just didn't get involved. And some of those did get involved a bit more in the second half, like Wardlaw, but we can't afford to have passengers like that. Red time goals for a change. I've talked about that most weeks, so I'm not going to go over it. Rankine, small forward, killing us just for a change. I talked about him in the 5 stars. And just in general, I thought we were very fumbly again today. It's just really costing us, and you can see it comes from a lack of confidence. If any of you have played sport or been involved in sport, you know that confidence is one of those intangible things. It's really hard to quantify, but you know it when you see it. And often being fumbly and not having that one-touch feel about you is a sign that your confidence is low or that you're sort of in your own head. And I think that's a space that a lot of our players are at the moment. Not Harry Sheezel. He's absolutely confident in his ability, but there'd be a much longer list of players that are fumbly and not getting it one touch at the moment. In terms of positives, there were some good things to talk about. And just here's a list of a couple of good things or things that I think we're at least trying. And I think that's when I mentioned Paul Curtis having some centre bounces earlier. I think at this stage we've got to be happy with the coaching staff is just trying some different looks. Not everything's going to work, but sometimes you might just learn that it doesn't work. Riley Hardiman looked like a solid player on debut. Made some mistakes. He had a kick across goal that got intercepted and was directly resulted in a goal for the Crows, but he also did some good stuff really early, smothered a handball that would have led to a certain goal. Look, overall had a really serviceable debut. I think he could play a role similar to what we'd hoped Goda would play for us this year. Probably not quite as tall as Goda, but I think, brings some fantastic defensive craft, has that ability to rebound, and I think it could be a positive player for us this year. So it's great that we've got a game into him, and hopefully he can put together a couple of games now before the bye and go in with some confidence. I mentioned earlier Paul Curtis going into the centre bounce and won a couple of clearances, so don't mind experimenting with that. Biggie Newen was the backup ruck early on. Didn't have many contests, but I think it's worth experimenting with that. I don't think it's ideal having Nick Larkey take the ruck contests unless it's in our forward 50. So I think trying to find someone else that can give Sherry some backup is not a bad idea. Look, don't know if it'll be Biggie. He's so light on as a frame, but as I say, I'm really happy for us to just be experimenting with different things, because the only thing that can happen is that we're going to lose by a bit more and learn maybe something from it. So I'm totally happy with that. Jai Simpkin in the middle more didn't work, but again, I'm glad that we're trying to find a role that's going to work for him, because it hasn't been working for him early in the year. We need to try and figure that out. So yeah, some experimentation, some positive, some negative from today, but at least we're trying stuff. And I think frustrated fans, that's kind of what we want to see. We want to see that the coaches are identifying that things aren't working and are trying different things to rectify it. And I think we as fans just then have to acknowledge that sometimes it's going to go horribly wrong because they're going to try something that might absolutely not work, but at least we've learned that doesn't work. Another positive, when it was looking dour late, I thought we rallied a little bit. We actually won the last quarter marginally, 32-30. Turned what could have been a 70 or 80 point loss back into a much more respectable 57 points. And quite honestly, that's the attitude that we've got to take, unfortunately. We've got a lot of talent in that forward half with Zerha and Larkey and Duursma and Curtis. We've just got to figure out how to give them, some service, because when we got it there early and late in the game, I thought they were pretty efficient. The mid part of the game where the ball movement really slowed down and it went back to that bombing it long when Adelaide had some numbers back, it didn't work so well. But we know that if we're able to transition the ball, we're able to give them one-on-one or 50-50 chances, they're actually not too bad. As I say, particularly those four that I named. Lazaro and Powell, probably not quite as much forward craft, although both of them kicked a goal each today. Yeah, I just thought it was positive that we didn't completely drop our heads and make it an absolute shellacking. Certainly still very comfortably beaten, blown out of the water, but you'd prefer 57-point loss to a 70 or 80-point loss, which is what it looked like was going to happen, as I said, sort of late or early in that last quarter. I think we know that a big problem with the forward line is that it just comes out far too easily if we do lose those 50-50s. So we've got to try and find the right mix of players, to have around those 4 or so that I mentioned. I think Duursma, with another year or two, is going to be super dangerous, and we know what Curtis is starting to become. Who knows if Zerha's even there next year, to be honest. We know that there's a lot of free agency talk about him and the potential for him to move, and I'm not going to buy too much into that until the end of the year, but regardless, I think, an area that we need to work on in the forward line, that the forward line can actually work on, is that pressure on the ball and that tackling when the ball hits the ground, because if we lose the 50-50s, it just seems to slingshot straight out of there with not enough pressure on the ball. And then, look, we're scraping the barrel for positives, like I mentioned earlier, because of the nature of the game, but some little positives. Maybe this performance from Zerha sparks his season, kicking 3 goals 3. I thought his first 6 weeks have been pretty poor. Holistically speaking, he's had a couple of good moments, but has really struggled to impact games. So for him to hit the scoreboard 6 times today, from limited opportunity, hopefully that's the start of him finding some form. Like I said, I think I could have easily given him the 1 vote instead of Duursma. McKercher's great game, touching it 32 times. Chom learned some fantastic defensive craft playing on Taylor Walker today. You really can't put a price on having to follow around Taylor Walker. Say what you like about the bloke. I'm not a big fan of him as a bloke, but he's been a fantastic big key forward for 10 years or so. And so having Charlie, follow him around is definitely going to help him learn the craft of playing that key defensive role. I thought George Wardlaw really bounced back from a quiet first half. Didn't really have any impact, and I thought was able to kick a goal in the second half and won some ball, won some clearances. So that's the kind of maturity that we're hoping to build from a player like George, where it didn't go his way in the first half. He goes into the sheds, resets, and has a better impact. Wasn't an amazing game from him, but like I said, I thought his second half impact was better. It's a really hard midfield to be playing in at the moment because there's just not enough grunt work in there, not enough players doing enough. Duursma showed plenty from his opportunities that he got, was super efficient. I thought the capacity that we had to experiment with Sheezel playing a bit higher up the ground in the second half was a positive. All these things is the sort of growth that we have to live for at the moment. It's all we've got. These little slithers of things that we see players do that oftentimes aren't going to result in scoreboard impact, but are potential, improvements or things that we could look for in the future when things are a bit brighter. So, look, I know that those things don't really seem like major positives, and that's probably because they're not. But, as North Melbourne supporters, we're not training, we're not coaching. They're the things that we've got to hold on to, are these little glimmers of potential for the future or little bits of growth that we see in these players. The only other thing to mention was this is the 3rd time we've hit 80 points. We scored 81 and we've scored 81 again against Freo, and I think it was 82 against the Giants. So that seems to be where we're topping out at the moment. The improvement's going to have to come from the defence. I don't really know how much more we're going to score in a game of football at the moment. I'm sure we could hit 90, but we're not going to win games of football unless our defence can, concede less than, say, 16, 17 goals. And in order for that to happen, we're going to need that defence across the whole ground to pick up. So we are hitting the scoreboard a little better than we have in the past. It's just we are leaking goals at a crazy level, and you can see that when you look at the ladder. And our points against compared to everyone else is horrific, to say the least. So we look ahead. Other news: the VFL side lost the GWS VFL side 94-67. And like I've been saying, there's nothing coming through from the VFL that is going to change the senior side dramatically. Tyler Sellers kicked 3 goals. So it's good to have him back in some goal-scoring form, but you'd think he's going to spend a couple of weeks at least in the VFL to hopefully build his confidence up again. Jaden Stevenson kicked a couple, Finbar Maley kicked a couple, and had 6 marks, 12 hit-outs, a couple of clearances for Finbar, so he's continuing to play okay at VFL level. Curtis Taylor and Liam Shields found a bit of the ball and kicked a goal each. Miller Bergman made his return game with 24 touches. So, look, none of these players are going to come in and absolutely change our look, but they're the kinds of players that we've got right now that could replace a player or two. I would expect Bergman to find his way into the side soon. He was listed as an emergency this week, so maybe a couple of games at VFL level, and then he replaces someone like Hardiman. Or, look, at this point, I'd be happy if he replaced someone like McDonald inside. I don't think that's going to happen, but we do need some more good ball users off halfback. Whilst Bergman's not a massive attacking threat, he's capable of hitting a target, even if it's not a bullet pass necessarily. So, look, that's what we've got coming through. It's not a lot. It's nothing to get super excited about. The VFL side is certainly playing better than the AFL side, so that's a positive. It was really they only really got overran in that last quarter. Played a fairly decent game before that point. So, yeah, that's what the VFL side has for us. There was some talk that Braden George might have sustained an injury. I don't have any inside word or any extra knowledge on that, so not too sure, sorry, but I hope not. He's been building in the VFL as well, and he's another one that could come in off halfback, similar to Miller Bergman, and potentially have an impact at some point this season. We know there's been heaps of excitement about his debut, and I'm sure it will happen at some point. But yeah, he's potentially going to be sidelined I think it was a shoulder that he potentially injured. So we'll wait and see, or wait to hear some news about that during the week. The only other news really is Tristan Sherry signing on until 2029, which I think is super positive. He joins Simkin, Larky and Sheezel as being on those long-term contracts. I think 3 of them are now through to 2029, and Shees is maybe through to 2030. Yeah, super positive. I couldn't be more happy with Tristan Sherry's output this year. We know he's not a perfect ruckman, but I think the fact that he's taken on this role as the number one ruckman in Goldie's absence is fantastic. It's been great to see him grab it with both hands. We needed him to, because Taylor Goad, who we hope is probably our next ruckman, is a long way away. And yeah, I think it's important to have some security there. I don't really buy these contracts as being as tight as they once were. I think ultimately what it means is Sherry could leave at any point if he really wants to. But if he goes out of form, we're still going to have to, pay him till 2029. That's really what it amounts to. It gives him security, but at the end of the day, if a player wants to leave in contract, invariably it happens. There are those couple of odd examples where players have been held to their contract and not traded, but 99 times out of 100, or maybe more like 95 times out of 100, if a player wants to leave, they do leave. So, look, just bear that in mind with these super, super long contracts. I'm not anticipating any of those 4 are going to want to leave. Tristan Sherry is a North Melbourne supporter as a child. I think he's past that point now where he's looking elsewhere because he knows that he's going to get the opportunity here. So it was fantastic for him to sign on. The only other news has been around players like Zerha and LDU and whether or not they're going to re-sign or they're putting off contract talks, that kind of thing. I'm just super happy for that to play out. I just don't know if there's much to wait in on there. They're both good players, and I really could absolutely understand if both of them want to wait it out and see what kind of opportunities arise, particularly with the salary cap on the rise. I think it's smart business from them, and you have to be honest with yourself. If you're a player in their position, it's really admirable that we've had these 4 players that have wanted to sign on, but you couldn't begrudge someone for looking around, because we're in year sort of 4 or 5 now of being a really, really poor football side. And, if you're in a workplace that's going really, really poorly for that long, I think you too would look around. So that's really all I want to say on that. I just think we wait and see until later in the year, and then we get a clearer understanding about what might happen. I think that's all we as fans could and should be doing. In terms of next week, a quick look ahead. We've got another Saturday game, but it's the twilight game against St Kilda at Marvel Stadium on Saturday, May the 4th. May the 4th be with you for the Star Wars fans out there. I certainly am not one. They're 2-5, so hardly in form, but I'm sure they'll be licking their lips at the idea of playing us because, much like Brisbane, I will probably play them in some form for a week or two. A relatively mature midfield, so That's an area that, whilst it's supposed to be a strength of ours, has been a problem all year. So I'd be concerned that Rowan Marshall's going to be tapping it down to Jack Steele and running away from us on a regular basis. I'm already having nightmares about that. To be honest, I'm expecting a similar result to what we got against the Crows. They've got some great defenders such as Wilkie who can intercept. I just spoke about the midfield. I'd say Caminiti or Membry are going to be looking to take advantage of their lackluster defence and take some marks and kick some goals. Cooper Sharman's another one that I'd be worried about up forward. I've really liked what I've seen from him in the early parts of his career. So, yeah, look, I'm certainly not feeling confident, but at least they're a side that's not in form. So hopefully we can be competitive. Game number 8, so we are coming. We really are around about the 1/3 of the way through the season. So hopefully the coaching staff are going to continue experimenting and trying to find some things that work. And as I said earlier, if those things don't work, I just think we've got to stay patient. Clarko spoke about that in the press conference, that he's really confident in what he's trying to do, and he's really patient. He understands that some fans are going to be less patient, but from his perspective, it's year 2, whereas for us as fans, it's year 4 or 5 of the build, and really it's been a long time since we've had any kind of success on field. So naturally, we're going to be a bit more impatient than Clarko, who's been in the job for a year and a half. Anyway, that'll do me for the podcast. I always think it's going to be a shorter episode, but there's just been a lot to talk about in recent weeks, despite it going very poorly on the field. So yeah, I'll speak to you sometime after the St Kilda game. Thank you again for all the interactions online and the likes and the comments and the reviews. I appreciate all the support, and I appreciate speaking with the North Pod community on a regular basis. I do hope that you have a fantastic week. Hopefully I will speak to you after a win against the Saints. And go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.